discussion here, no voting, but just a discussion as to whether or not the board would like to see future agenda items added to the board agenda so that the Board of Education can vet whether or not they would like to see items placed on the board, on the agenda for the next meeting. So we are discussing, let me see if I can say that more clearly because it was not very concise. This would allow us to put an agenda item for future agenda items there. Board members could submit what they would like to see on future board agendas into that item prior to that agenda being published. And then the board as a whole would have discussion whether or not they wanted that agenda item moved into the next board meeting.
When I put this forward back in December, I suggested we have a future agenda items category, and at that time could not get a second on it. So I'm actually amazed it resurfaced here 7 months later, because I sure as heck couldn't get it moved forward. And it's a standard category, and I don't mind a bit because I'm one submitting a lot of agenda items. I don't mind a bit if the board has a discussion, because frequently the board sits and doesn't have a discussion around them. So I have no problem with board discussion ever.
I think this is I think this appears to be considerably different than what I saw before. This would indicate that items would be placed on there, and the discussion would be around whether or not the item should be placed on a future agenda, and then a vote would be taken. Is that correct? As to whether or not an agenda item would be actually placed on an agenda?
You can't vote on those agenda items, Gary.
It's not voting on the agenda items. It's
you can't vote if they're going to be on the agenda.
It's voting on whether or not it gets placed on an agenda. Is that correct?
Yes.
So it's a change in, I'm sorry, it's a change in board policy relative to how agenda items are placed on the agenda.
My view of this would be that, for example, through a particular agenda item, you might decide that you had a thought that you would like to place on a future agenda. The board president under this particular item, and you voice that during that particular motion. Then the board president under this item would say, Mr. Everhart offered that he would like to have this placed on a future agenda. Thumbs up or thumbs down. And then if everybody agrees, then staff would work on it. If there's no agreement, staff wouldn't work on it.
I'm totally for that, because, you know, we have a limited number of staff, and those staff members have limited hours that they can work, and they do need to get a little bit of sleep. And I have seen agenda items that are just truly remarkable, you know, being placed on the agenda that literally go nowhere. So I'm totally supportive of this.
So this wouldn't be providing them to staff to place on this item. It would be that we present them orally, and then we determine whether staff would move forward. That's my concept of this.
You explained it much more succinctly, Ms. Mayo. Thank you.
So you would bring back policy change that would support this movement. Okay.
Well, before you bring it to action, what you need to do is write it up, because what you're doing is adding components, and normally when you have an information item, you look at the components of what's being proposed, and then we take action on it. So whoever is placing this, you know, because you didn't agree 7 months ago with my future agenda items, if you're adding pieces to it, then you need to have that explained, because it comes back as an action item, and in order to do that, when it's information, you have to be fully informed. And that's what we see on these different proposals that come forward.
Well, I don't know that this requires, if we have an understanding and develop, you know, can concur on what we're doing, I don't know that it requires a board action to add a category to the agenda, because at various times under different presidents, we've added or removed.
I think there's a policy shift, though.
No, it's different than just putting future agenda items, which is great, because that's a CSBA recommended category for agendas, and so that's perfectly great. But when you add parameters around what occurs, it's not just proposing future agenda items. You're doing a thumbs up, thumbs down. You're doing kind of a monitoring and screening of agenda items, which is a whole different ball game because board members are eligible and free and permitted to bring forward agenda items. And so if you want to put parameters of behavior or restrictions or rules around it, then that's a different thing than just saying future agenda items. Because with future agenda items in the CSBA model, you're simply proposing future agenda items.
I don't think it precludes both, but I think it gives it will help us clear the air on what the board wants to consider in its action and direction that we're providing to staff.
Well, whoever conceived this and put it on, I would suggest and ask, actually not even suggest, require that it be more explicitly explained and sent out to us prior to the next board meeting where this reappears. Because I think this is not, it's not the CSBA, it's an extension of that. It's beyond that. So I would ask that that be spelled out more clearly. Who put this on the agenda?
I did based on board president and vice president input and request.
Well, how about
It's
if the two of you put that a little bit more explicitly phrased and email that out to us?
We can't.
That would be helpful.
That would only,
Well, Dr. Lawrence can.
that could only occur as an agenda item.
Well, I would like to see it more explicit because now you're adding pieces to it where I had it as a CSBA agenda item.
I would have to relook at the CSBA item on this. I have not looked at it in recent memory to recall.
And I'm not saying we have to, I mean, CSBA is simply an advisory body, by the way. It's not rule of law.
So it sounds like there's enough board direction that we could put that on the next agenda. Okay. The next one is an amendment